Hello and welcome to the course. It's great to have you here. In this first session, we'll take a closer look at what positive psychology really is, why it matters, and how you can start weaving its ideas into your everyday life in simple, practical ways. When you hear the word psychology, what comes to mind? For many people, it's things like mental illness, anxiety, depression, or trauma. In other words, the focus on what can go wrong. And for a long time, that's exactly where psychology placed its attention. That work is incredibly important, of course. It's helped us understand and treat mental illness, and it continues to save lives every day. But if we only focus on what's wrong, we miss an important part of the picture. The absence of depression doesn't automatically mean the presence of happiness. And that's where positive psychology comes in. It asks a different set of questions, like what makes life worth living? And how can we build well-being, resilience, and a sense of fulfillment, not just recover from pain? Positive psychology asks a different kind of question. Instead of focusing only on what's wrong with people, it also asks what makes life worth living. What helps people not just get by, but truly thrive? You can think of it like a scale running from -5 to +5. Traditional psychology helps people move from -5, a place of illness or suffering, up to 0, where things feel stable again. Positive psychology says, that's wonderful progress, but why stop there? Let's also look at how to move from 0 to +5, toward fulfillment, joy, and real resilience. People have always been curious about what makes life happy and meaningful. Even thousands of years ago, philosophers like Plato and Aristotle were asking those very same questions. Aristotle used the word eudaimonia, which means living a flourishing, fulfilling life. Fast forward to the 20th century, and psychologists like Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers began exploring human growth and potential. You might recognize Maslow, hierarchy of needs, with self-actualization becoming your best self right at the top. Then, in 1979, Aaron Antonovsky introduced the idea of salutogenesis, which looks at what creates health and helps people stay well, even through difficult times. The challenge, though, was that much of this early work wasn't always considered scientific enough. That changed in the late 1990s when Martin Seligman and Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi formally introduced the field of positive psychology. They argued that psychology shouldn't only study illness and what goes wrong, it should also study strengths, happiness, and what helps people truly thrive. Now that we've covered a bit of the background, let's take a closer look at what's often called the disease model. Traditionally, this is how psychology understood human struggles, by focusing mainly on what's wrong. The goal wasn't to help people flourish, but to reduce suffering, to bring someone from -5, a place of distress or dysfunction, back to 0, a place of normal functioning. You can see this approach in lots of settings. In therapy, the aim might be to reduce symptoms of depression. In schools, teachers often spend hours helping students improve in the subjects they find hardest. And in workplaces, managers might focus mostly on why an employee didn't hit a target. Of course, addressing weaknesses matters, it's an important part of growth. But here's the thing. Fixing what's wrong doesn't automatically lead to success, happiness, or excellence. It stops us at 0 and overlooks that upper range, the 0 to +5, where people truly flourish, find meaning, and build resilience. Think of it like training an athlete. If you only work on their weakest skills, they might reach an average level. But if you also help them build on what they're already great at, say, a sprinter leaning into their natural speed, that's where they can become exceptional. And that's exactly the shift positive psychology brings. Now, before we go any further, let's clear up a few common myths about positive psychology. Myth 1: fixing problems automatically leads to well-being. This is a common one. People often assume that if we get rid of negative emotions like anger, fear, or sadness, we'll automatically feel happy and fulfilled. But that's not how it works. Positive and negative emotions aren't two ends of the same stick, they're separate experiences. Someone can recover from depression, for example, and still feel flat or unfulfilled. The absence of pain doesn't necessarily mean the presence of joy. Myth 2, coping means eliminating negative feelings. Actually, coping often means learning to live with challenges without letting them take over. Stress, for example, can feel uncomfortable, but it isn't always bad. When we see it as something that can help us grow, what's called eustress, it can actually work in our favor. Think of a student preparing for an exam. They might feel nervous, but that same energy can help them focus and put in the effort to do their best. Myth 3. Fixing weaknesses leads to excellence. Interestingly, research shows it's often the other way around. In schools, workplaces, and even therapy, we spend a lot of time trying to correct what's not working. And while that can help, it usually only brings us up to average. Think about it. Would you rather spend all your energy trying to fix what you're bad at, or invest that time in what you naturally do well? That's where true growth and fulfillment happen. Myth 4. Strengths grow naturally. Strengths don't just develop on their own, they're like muscles. They need to be used and stretched to grow. Qualities like optimism, creativity, or kindness can absolutely be trained and strengthened over time, especially when we practice them intentionally. Without that practice, our strengths can stay hidden or underused. Think of a creative child who never gets the chance to explore or imagine. That potential might never fully unfold. It's the same for all of us. Our strengths grow when we use them. Myth 5. Focusing on weaknesses prevents problems. Treating illness isn't the same as preventing it. Real prevention means looking at why some people stay well and resilient even when life gets tough, and learning from that. It's about building resources before problems take hold. For example, instead of waiting for employees to burn out and then offering stress management programs, companies can prevent burnout by promoting well-being from the start, things like mindfulness sessions, supportive teams, or flexible working hours. So what does positive psychology actually look at, and why does it matter to you? In 1998, Martin Seligman brought positive psychology back into the spotlight. He encouraged us to widen our view of psychology, to go beyond just fixing what's wrong. Instead of focusing only on the range from -5 to 0, positive psychology looks at how we can move from 0 to +5, towards strength, resilience, and flourishing. It asks questions like, what makes people genuinely happy? Why do some people bounce back from trauma while others find it harder to recover? One fascinating area of research here is post-traumatic growth. While some people experience lasting stress, anxiety, or painful memories after trauma, others come out of it feeling stronger, more connected, and more purposeful. Positive psychology explores why that happens and how we can create the conditions for that kind of growth. It also asks how qualities like gratitude, optimism, and kindness can be measured, practiced, and taught. And just to be clear, this isn't about ignoring pain or pretending challenges don't exist. Positive psychology doesn't replace traditional psychology, it complements it. It's about building the positive while learning to manage the negative. Let's bring all of this to life with a few practical examples from positive psychology. The first one is gratitude journaling. This is simply taking a minute each day to write down a few things you're thankful for. They don't have to be big. Maybe it's your morning coffee, a smile from a friend, or a quiet moment at the end of the day. Over time, this simple practice helps you notice more of the good that's already there. In this course, you'll even get a journal to help you make it part of your routine. Then we have the stress reframe. This one's about changing the way you think about stress. Instead of seeing it as the enemy, you start to see it as your body helping you get ready to perform. For example, a racing heart before a talk or meeting might just mean your system gearing up to help you focus. When you can see stress that way, it becomes something you can use rather than something that controls you. The next one is called the best possible self exercise. Here, you take a moment to imagine your future self, life going well, things falling into place, and you feeling fulfilled. Writing about this vision helps you focus on what's possible, not just on what's difficult right now. And that naturally boosts optimism and motivation. And finally, strength assessments. We all have personal strengths, things like creativity, kindness, or perseverance, but we don't always recognize them. A strengths assessment helps you identify what you naturally bring to the table, so you can use it more intentionally in your work and your relationships. Throughout this program, we'll keep coming back to these tools. You'll get to practice them, talk about them, and see how they show up in your daily life until they start to feel like second nature. Before we wrap up today's module, it's important to remember that positive psychology is not about ignoring problems. It doesn't mean pretending life is always good or turning away from pain. It's about balance. We still need to address weaknesses and challenges. But alongside that, we also build strengths, resilience, and meaning. As Martin Seligman put it, positive psychology is not happyology. So to put it all together, traditional psychology focuses on helping people move from suffering, that -5, to feeling okay, which is 0. Positive psychology builds on that foundation. It adds the science of thriving, helping people move from okay to flourishing, from 0 to +5. It reminds us that building strengths is just as important as repairing what's broken. So instead of only asking, what's wrong and how can we fix it? We also ask, how can we reduce suffering and how can we create a life that feels meaningful and fulfilling, even when things are hard? And that's really the heart of positive psychology. As we move through this course, we encourage you to keep the following questions in mind. What are your own strengths? When have you felt at your best? And what practices could help you move from okay to thriving? This course is here to help you explore those questions for yourself, to think about what they mean in your own life and how you can apply them day to day. Because positive psychology isn't just something we read about or teach. It's something we live. Thank you for joining me for this session. I hope it's given you a clearer sense of what positive psychology is really about, not just as a theory, but as a way of seeing and approaching life. Take a bit of time to reflect on what stood out for you today, and maybe notice how these ideas show up in your own experience over the coming days. I look forward to seeing you in the next module, where we'll start putting these ideas into practice.